They say God works in quiet ways, but nothing felt quiet the night an elderly couple vanished into a brutal Colorado blizzard. No one heard their cries for help. No one stood between them and the man who had threatened to drive them from their home. No one, except a force sent at the exact moment justice was needed. A lone Navy SEAL returning from war, a battle-trained German shepherd who sensed danger before any human could, and a storm so unforgiving that only a miracle could pull two fragile lives back from the edge. Some call it coincidence, others call it divine timing. But after you hear what happened on that mountain road, you may believe God still sends protectors when darkness closes in. Before we continue, share this story with someone who still believes in justice. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so these stories of courage and grace can reach those who need them. The couple lost in the blizzard. Winter winds carved through the Colorado mountains, turning every breath into frost. Snow churned across the highway like a living tide, sweeping over the asphalt until even the painted lines vanished under shifting white. The storm had rolled in faster than any forecast warned, swallowing the road, the trees, the sky itself. And in the middle of that blinding world walked an elderly man and a woman, holding on to each other as the cold threatened to hollow them out. Harold Miller, 73, had the sturdy bones of someone who had spent a lifetime fixing fences, repairing barns, and refusing help even when he needed it most. His frame had grown thinner in recent years, his shoulders stooped not from weakness but from too many burdens he insisted on carrying alone. Age had sharpened the lines on his weathered face, deepening the grooves around his mouth and eyes. His thinning gray hair was plastered to his forehead by snow, and beneath his mustache his lips had already begun to pale. He was stubborn, proud, and utterly unprepared for a storm of this scale. Beside him shuffled his wife, Ruth Miller, small and bird-like, with silver hair escaping from beneath her knit hood. She had once been a school librarian and still carried that gentle, patient way of speaking that made people lean in to hear her. Her frame was frail, but her determination burned bright beneath it, strong enough to keep them moving long after her strength should have given out. The cold stung her cheeks until they flushed rose red. She clutched a faded canvas bag to her chest, containing Harold's medical files, their remaining savings, and a creased family photo whose edges had long since softened with time. They had left their wooden house on the outskirts of a small mountain town after Harold's heart medicine ran out. The landline had died the day before, when an ice-laden branch snapped it in two. Their cell reception didn't stand a chance against the storm. They thought they could reach the gas station 5 miles down the highway, a place where travelers still stopped, where someone might lend them a phone or offer a ride. Instead, they found themselves swallowed by a winter turned merciless. Wind cut through their thin coats. Harold pressed a trembling hand to his chest, feeling the familiar throb of strain. Ruth noticed it, but said nothing. She knew if she asked him to stop, he would insist on going farther, simply to prove he could. She tightened her fingers around his sleeve, the fabric already stiffening with frost. They kept walking. A gust of wind nearly knocked Ruth sideways. She blinked against the stinging snow until her eyes watered. Every shape looked like another shape, every shadow a trick of the storm. What had once been a world she knew felt like a place she had never seen before. Harold's steps faltered, then he slipped. His knee buckled as he hit the powdery snow, sending up a small cloud of white. Hakar tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled violently. A jagged pain shot through his chest, stealing what little breath he had left. Harold, stay with me," Ruth pleaded, dropping to her knees. Her joints screamed in protest, but she didn't care. She hooked her arms under his, trying to lift him, but her own strength flickered like a dying ember. The highway was empty. No headlights, no engines, no hope. Snow whirled around them like a curtain closing in. The storm howled and wailed, drowning out their shivering breaths. Harold leaned into Ruth's shoulder, his weight sagging more with each second. The cold crept through his coat, through his bones, through his heart. "We won't make it," he whispered, his voice thin as paper. Ruth didn't answer. She only wrapped her arms around him, shielding him as best she could from a storm that did not care whose life it took. She bowed her head, and she prayed, quietly, desperately, with the trembling sincerity of someone who feared her words might be the last she ever spoke. Then, faint and muffled, carried by the wind, a bark. Low, steady, confident. Not the frantic bark of a stray searching for shelter, not the frightened cry of an animal lost in the storm. No, this was different. This was the call of a creature trained for danger, sharpened by hardship, and fearless in the face of any threat. Ruth's eyes snapped open. She lifted her head, squinting into the swirling white. For a heartbeat, she saw nothing but snow. Then, a flicker of light, faint, wavering, like a lantern behind a fogged window. It bobbed once, twice, then disappeared behind the veil of the storm. Harold stirred weakly. "Did you hear something?" Ruth wasn't sure. Her mind teetered between hope and hallucination. The cold played tricks, the night played tricks, the storm played tricks. But then the bark came again, closer, deeper, more certain. A heartbeat later, another sound followed, the low rumble of a vehicle engine pushing through snowdrifts. Ruth clutched Harold's hand. Tears blurred her vision, freezing at the corners of her lashes. "Harold! Someone's out there!" But the blizzard was too dense to see more than a shifting ghost of light. Wind tore at her hood. Snow swallowed her breath. She couldn't tell whether salvation was coming, or whether the storm would smother them before rescue arrived. The chapter ends as that single bark echoes once more across the frozen highway, nearer now, but the swirling white hides whether the man and his German shepherd will reach the elderly couple in time. The Navy SEAL and the war dog snow-hammered the mountain road in hard, slanting sheets, turning the night into a blur of white. The gray pickup crawled forward, tires grinding against the icy slope. Inside, Noah Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. At 40, he carried the build of a man carved from years of discipline, broad shoulders, a straight spine, and the quiet strength of someone who had spent most of his life pushing through pain. His jaw, dusted with several days of dark stubble, was set in its usual stoic line. A faint scar curved along his right cheekbone, the most visible reminder of a rescue mission in Kandahar that had gone wrong. He rarely spoke about it, and no one dared ask. Noah's eyes, a deep storm gray, reflected both alertness and exhaustion. The war had never quite left them. Neither had the nights when explosions ripped through cramped alleyways and he had to decide in seconds who lived and who didn't. The cold did not bother him nearly as much as the stillness. Stillness left room for memories. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Ranger. Ranger was a 5-year-old German shepherd, his frame powerful and balanced, his coat thick with black and tan fur. His ears stood tall, swiveling at even the faintest sound. His amber eyes held the sharp intelligence of a creature trained to read danger before any human did. The dog wore a black tactical harness with white block letters. Service dog. Do not pet. He took his role seriously. He always had. Ranger had seen combat, seen the darkness that men could hide behind false smiles. If Noah was the blade, Ranger was the unseen edge, silent, efficient, and terrifying to anyone foolish enough to underestimate him. Together, they had brought down human traffickers, drug runners, and men who carried cruelty like a second skin. For local troublemakers in Durango, the rumor of the SEAL and his war dog was enough to end most bad ideas before they started. Tonight, however, the mountain was their only opponent. Wind slammed against the truck, rocking it sideways. Noah kept his expression neutral, adjusting the wheel with steady precision. But Ranger lifted his head, letting out a low growl that vibrated through the cabin. "What is it, buddy?" Noah murmured, scanning the darkness ahead. Ranger's gaze fixed on the swirling snow beyond the headlights. Then Noah saw it. Two shapes on the shoulder of the road, small, trembling, hunched against the wind. For a second, the blizzard almost swallowed them again. Noah hit the brakes. The truck skidded before regaining traction, stopping several yards ahead of the figures. He turned on the hazard lights. His heart tightened. Elderly, frail, barely upright. They should have frozen by now. Ranger was already whining softly, impatient to move. "Yeah, I know," Noah said, shoving open the door. "We're going." The cold blasted into him as he stepped into the storm, slicing through his coat like sharpened ice. The breath was pulled from his lungs immediately, but he pushed forward, boots sinking deep into the drifts. Ranger leaped out beside him, landing solidly, body low and ready. Snow clung to his fur as he bounded ahead, clearing a path. "Sir! Ma'am!" Noah shouted, his voice barely carrying against the roar of the blizzard. "Don't fall asleep. I'm Noah Carter. I'm here to help you." The pair didn't respond at first. They clung to each other, their forms shaking under the weight of cold and exhaustion. As Noah got closer, he could finally see their faces. The man, Harold Miller, though Noah did not yet know his name, was gaunt, his cheekbones stark under wind-burned skin. Deep wrinkles lined his forehead, each one carved by a lifetime of grit. His lips were nearly blue, his breath shallow. Snow crusted his gray eyebrows. The woman, Ruth, had soft silver hair whipping wildly around her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also something stubborn and steady beneath it, the kind of strength that held families together long after the world stopped trying. A faded canvas bag was clutched against her chest, as though it carried her whole life. When Noah reached them, Ruth blinked up at him, disoriented. Harold tried to speak, but only a trembling gasp escaped. "Easy," Noah said gently, slipping an arm beneath Harold's shoulders. "You're freezing. We need to move." Ranger circled them, assessing, then barked once, short, urgent, directed toward Harold's chest. Noah understood immediately. He pressed 2 fingers to the older man's neck. Weak pulse, too weak. Ranger barked again, angling his body toward the truck, as if commanding them to hurry. Noah lifted Harold with controlled strength, adjusting his weight so as not to strain the older man's chest. "I've got you. Just lean on me." Ruth reached for Harold's hand, her own fingers stiff and white. Noah kept one eye on the storm and one on Ranger, who was now scanning the tree line. The dog's posture had shifted, alert, tense, protective. Ranger sensed things long before Noah did. Men with bad intent, footsteps in the snow, vehicles that approached too fast. And though there was no threat here except the mountain itself, Ranger stood like a sentinel, ready to become a weapon if needed. They trudged toward the truck, Noah half carrying Harold. Ruth stumbled, but Ranger positioned himself at her side, guiding her with gentle nudges of his shoulder. A gust of wind slammed into them, sending snow spiraling so thick they could barely see the glow of the truck's hazard lights. "Stay awake," Noah shouted over the storm. "We're almost there." Ruth gasped out. We tried to get help." "I know," Noah said, tightening his hold on Harold. "You're safe now." But even as he spoke, he felt Harold's body sag heavier. Ranger barked sharply. Another warning. Noah quickened his pace, muscles burning, heart thudding. The dog trotted beside him, guiding Ruth, guarding all 3 of them with quiet, lethal vigilance. They reached the truck. Noah pulled the door open, snow pouring into the cab. With practiced care, he maneuvered Harold inside, then helped Ruth climb in beside him. Ranger leaped into the back seat, positioning himself between them like a shield. Wind shook the truck violently. Noah slammed the door shut. And for a moment, only a moment, the blizzard muffled outside, leaving behind the ragged breaths of 2 lives hanging by a thread, and the steady, low growl of a war dog refusing to let death try anything. Noah turned the heater on full blast. "We're getting you out of this," he said softly. But even as the warmth sputtered to life, the storm thrashed harder against the windows, reminding him that survival would not come easily tonight. The chapter ends with Noah gripping the wheel again, Ranger watching the storm with unblinking focus, as the line between rescue and loss narrows to a sliver of hope in the frozen dark. The cabin in the pines and the secrets they carried, wind curled through the dark tree line, whispering against the walls of Noah's cabin like a warning that refused to quiet. Noah Carter pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the unconscious weight of Harold Miller sprawled across his back. The older man had grown frighteningly limp during the drive. Behind him, Ruth Miller clung to the doorframe, her breath thin but determined. Ranger slipped in first, the 5-year-old German shepherd moving with the silent confidence of a seasoned guardian, scanning corners, thresholds, and windows before allowing the humans to enter fully. The cabin smelled of pine resin, old firewood, and iron tools that hadn't been touched in years. A handmade quilt lay folded on the couch, its fading blues and reds stitched long ago by Noah's mother, one of the few warm things left from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Sit by the hearth," Noah instructed, his voice low but steady. He lowered Harold into the recliner nearest the fireplace, bracing the older man's shoulders until he settled. Then Noah crossed the room in 3 confident strides, knelt, and struck a match. The fire caught on the second try, flames licking upward with a crackle. Light spilled across Harold's drawn face, illuminating the deep lines carved by years of labor and quiet stubbornness. His cheeks were gray under the frostburn. His lips trembled with effort even in unconsciousness. Ruth sank onto the couch, leaning forward with both hands clasped tightly together. Her fingers were still red from the cold, knuckles pale between them. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice cracked halfway through the words. Noah shook his head. "Save your strength." Ranger sat beside him, posture tall, ears angled toward Harold's shallow breathing. The dog's amber eyes didn't blink once. Beneath the harness, the muscles along his back quivered with alert intensity. Every few seconds he lowered his nose toward Harold, assessing the older man's condition the way he had done beside wounded soldiers in dusty fields half a world away. Noah set a kettle of snow on the stovetop, then rummaged through a drawer for thick wool blankets. "We need to rewarm him slowly," he said, more to himself than to Ruth. "Too fast will shock the heart." He tucked a blanket over Harold's legs, then loosened the older man's collar to ease his breathing. Ruth watched with wide, fearful eyes. She looked years older under the cabin's dim light, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her small frame curled inward like she was holding herself together through sheer will. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "This storm, we should have never tried to walk, but we didn't have a choice." She hesitated, swallowing hard. "The medicine should have come days ago." Noah paused, sensing more behind her words. Ruth continued, tightening her grip on the canvas bag in her lap. "The package arrived at the boarding house 2 days back, but the landlord, he didn't give it to us." Her eyes lowered, shame flickering across them. "He said we needed to pay higher rent before he released anything important." Noah's jaw clenched. His stubble shadowed the hard line of his cheek, and for a moment the warmth in his gray eyes disappeared, replaced by a cold steel glimmer, the same look he wore before breaching a door in distant, hostile cities. Ranger's ears perked sharply. The dog shifted his weight, picking up the same tension Noah felt. If Noah was thunder, Ranger was lightning, silent until it struck. Ruth didn't seem to notice the shift in the room. She simply shook her head, tears threatening. "We refused. He told Harold. He told him he'd teach us a lesson if we complained. And then the power went out. And the phones died. And the storm came." Noah stood very still. He had met men like that landlord in other countries, predators who preyed on the weak, convinced no one brave enough would stop them, men who used fear as currency, men who believed consequences were something that happened to other people, men who were always surprised when justice arrived, in the shape of a Navy SEAL and a battle-trained dog. "His name?" Noah asked quietly. But Ruth shook her head. "Not now, please." She looked at Harold again, her voice trembling. "Just save my husband." That pulled Noah from the edge of anger. He moved to Harold's side, checking his pulse, his oxygen levels, the faint flutter of breath beneath the blankets. The signs were still worrying, but better than before. He prepared warm broth, spooning it carefully against Harold's lips. Ruth held her husband's chilled hands, whispering encouragement between shaky breaths. Outside, snow hammered against the windows. But inside, the cabin glowed brighter, the fire crackling like a heartbeat returning to life. Minutes stretched into an hour. Ranger never moved more than a few inches from Harold's chair. Every creak of wind, every shifting branch outside made his ears twitch, but he stayed grounded, his presence calm and commanding. It was the same posture he held while guarding wounded soldiers, silent, anchored, immovable. Ruth's voice eventually softened. "We used to walk those roads in summertime," she murmured, her eyes distant. "Harold always said winter couldn't scare him after growing up on a ranch." She laughed faintly, a sorrowful, fragile sound. "But age? Age is colder than any season." Noah didn't answer. Instead, he tucked the blanket higher, ensuring Harold's chest rose steadily. Then Harold stirred. His eyelids fluttered. Ruth gasped, leaning forward. "Harold?" A faint groan escaped the older man. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket. "Ruth," he rasped, barely audible. Tears spilled over her cheeks. "You're safe," she whispered. "We're safe." Noah exhaled a slow, controlled breath. Ranger let out a quiet whine, nudging Harold's knee as though welcoming him back. For the first time tonight, the tightness in Noah's chest eased, but exhaustion had not loosened its grip entirely. Harold was awake, but still in danger, and winter had a way of turning victories into illusions. Noah stood and moved to check the windows, Ranger following with silent precision. The dog's tail was low, his stance stiff, a sign he sensed something beyond the wind. Noah paused, listening, nothing but storm, for now. He returned to the fire, the warmth flickering across his sharp features. "You'll rest here tonight," he told Ruth softly. "Both of you. No arguments." Ruth nodded, too overwhelmed to protest. Noah pulled another blanket from the trunk by the wall. As he draped it over her shoulders, Ruth grasped his wrist. "We owe you our lives." Noah shook his head. "Just get warm." But as he turned away, Ruth saw something in his eyes, a heaviness, but also a promise. A quiet vow that no one, especially not a cruel landlord, would ever threaten them again. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, Ranger lowered himself near Harold's chair, alert as a sentry. The chapter closes with the 3 humans and 1 war dog held in fragile safety, unaware that the threat awaiting them in town is far colder than the snow outside, and that a Navy SEAL and his dog are the last people any bully should provoke. Facing the bully and the weight of silence, the storm left behind a world carved in white, where every sound carried farther than it should have. For 2 days, Noah Carter kept the fire burning inside the cabin, and the elderly Millers alive beside it. He rationed hot broth, changed blankets, and checked Harold's breathing with a practiced calm that came from years of treating wounded teammates in darker, harsher places. Ranger remained their shadow, a silent war dog whose vigilance never broke, whose amber eyes followed every movement in the cabin and every shift of wind outside. By the 3rd afternoon, the blizzard had thinned into scattered flurries drifting through the pines. The air was still cold enough to bite at exposed skin, but the danger of freezing in minutes had eased. Harold, now conscious and steadier, rested on the recliner with a blanket tucked up to his chin. His color had improved, though weakness lingered in each exhale. Ruth sat beside him, her small hands folded atop his, as though she feared the storm might return and snatch him away. Noah had just returned from stacking firewood when Ranger lifted his head sharply. The dog's ears angled forward, stiffening in a way Noah recognized instantly. Alert, not curious. Threat, not noise. "What is it?" Noah asked quietly. Ranger moved to the window, nails clicking softly across the wooden floor. A low growl vibrated in his chest. Noah wiped condensation from the glass and peered down the narrow trail leading into the clearing. A truck. Old, boxy, and dusted with dirty snow. It rolled to a stop near the cabin steps. Noah's posture shifted. Not fear, but readiness. The instinctive tightening of a man who had learned to read danger before it announced itself. He stepped aside so Ranger could get a better angle. The dog's fur lifted along his spine. 3 men climbed out of the truck. Leading them was Eldon Briggs, the boarding house landlord Ruth had described. He was in his mid-50s, thick around the middle but still broad-shouldered, with graying blonde hair combed back in an attempt to look respectable. His face was fleshy, his cheeks ruddy from cold and from a lifetime of cheap whiskey. Narrow, calculating eyes peeked out beneath heavy brows. The kind of man who had never faced real consequences and believed he never would. Behind him came 2 younger men, both large, both wearing smug expressions that carried the arrogance of bullies who had never been stopped. One had a shaved head and a jagged scar running from jaw to neck, evidence of a fight he probably bragged about more than he understood. The other wore a denim jacket and sported a short black beard, trimmed neatly but unable to soften the sharp cruelty in his eyes. Their heavy boots crunched across the snow with slow, deliberate confidence. Ruth saw them through the window and gasped. Harold clenched the armrests, his knuckles whitening. No emotion for them to stay calm. Then, positioned himself between the Millers and the door. Ranger stood at Noah's side, body rigid, tail straight, ears forward. In the dim cabin light, his harness patch, service dog, do not pet, glinted like a warning carved in stone. A pounding shook the front door. "Open up!" Eldon Briggs shouted, trying to make his voice sound friendly but failing. "We heard there were folks up here needing help," Ranger growled again, deeper this time. Noah opened the door halfway, leaning into the frame so his broad shoulders filled the space. "You've got no business here," he said, tone even, eyes steady. "The Millers are under my care. Sheriff knows where they are." Eldon forced a smile that never reached his eyes. "Now, we're all neighbors here. Just came to check on the old couple. Maybe bring them home where they belong." One of the younger men stepped forward, puffing himself up. "And who are you supposed to be? Some mountain mechanic?" Ranger shifted his weight. His lips lifted, revealing a flash of sharp white teeth. Noah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm the man standing between you and them." The shaved-headed man scoffed. "Cute dog. Think he's gonna scare somebody?" Ranger took one deliberate step forward, muscles rippling beneath his winter-thick coat. His amber eyes locked on the man with predatory clarity. Not wild, not reckless, trained, intent, dangerous. The bully froze mid-smirk. Noah let the moment stretch, then spoke in a low, measured tone that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. "I'm a former Navy SEAL," he said, And this dog has done things you can't imagine to men far worse than you." Silence hit the porch like a physical blow. The second young man swallowed hard, eyes flicking between Noah's cold stare and Ranger's poised stance. Eldon Briggs shifted uneasily, his facade cracking. Noah continued, still calm. "The Millers aren't leaving with you, and if you try to force it—" Ranger leaned forward, the rumble in his throat growing. "You'll learn very quickly why picking on old folks is the least dangerous mistake you've made this week." Eldon's mouth opened, then closed again. Panic flickered across his features. He lifted his hands in a show of surrender. "No need for threats. We'll head out. Just checking in." "Good," Noah said simply. The men backed up, stumbling slightly on the steps. The shaved-headed one looked like he wanted to say something defiant, but thought better of it when Ranger's ears flicked toward him. They hurried into the truck, tires spinning as they reversed down the trail. Only when the vehicle disappeared into the trees did Noah close the door. Ranger remained staring at the empty clearing for a long moment, ensuring the threat had truly left. Inside the cabin, Ruth fought back tears of relief. Harold exhaled shakily, his shoulders sagging. "No." Turned to them, the hardness in his expression fading. "They won't touch you again," he said. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the wind died for the first time in days. Inside, silence settled, but this time it felt like safety. And every bully in town would soon learn that crossing a seal and his war dog was a mistake no storm could hide. Winter, no longer faced alone. The mountain thawed slowly, as though winter itself hesitated to release its grip on the world. The storm that had once sealed the roads finally loosened its hold. Plows carved narrow pathways down the steep Colorado slopes, and sunlight broke through clouds that had brooded over the land for weeks. Noah Carter drove carefully, hands steady on the wheel, while Harold and Ruth Miller sat bundled beneath thick blankets in the back seat. Ranger lay between them, his powerful frame creating both warmth and a wall of protection should the truck jolt on black ice. Harold was still pale, the creases around his eyes deeper than before, but life had returned to his voice, a fragile but genuine strength. Ruth held his hand gently, her silver hair tucked into a soft knitted cap, her gaze fixed on the passing trees as if memorizing every sign that winter's cruelty was waning. When they reached Durango Medical Center, a modest hospital with beige brick walls and windows rimmed with frost, a doctor rushed out to greet them. Dr. Samuel Harding, a tall, lean man in his mid-40s with kind eyes behind wireframe glasses, assessed Harold with a mixture of professionalism and personal concern. His light brown hair was beginning to gray at the temples, and he carried himself with a quiet steadiness shaped by years of working in rural emergencies. "Let's get you inside, Mr. Miller," he said, gripping Harold's shoulder with reassuring firmness. "You held on longer than most would have." Harold gave a weak smile. "Had some help." Dr. Harding nodded at Noah, recognition flickering in his expression. "Good to see you're still watching over the mountain, Carter." "Somebody has to," Noah replied. Inside the hospital, while nurses checked Harold's oxygen levels and administered medication, the entrance doors burst open again. A young woman hurried inside, cheeks flushed from the cold. She had long brown hair pulled into a loose braid, warm hazel eyes, and a tall, athletic build. This was Emily Lawson, the Miller's niece from Denver. She wore a navy wool coat and carried herself with the urgency of someone who had traveled hours without pause. When she spotted Harold and Ruth, her face crumpled. She rushed to them, embracing both with shaking arms. "Aunt Ruth, Uncle Harold, I came as soon as the police called. I was so scared." Ruth cupped Emily's face with trembling hands. "We're all right now, dear. Truly." Emily then turned toward Noah, her expression shifting from gratitude to awe. "You're the one who found them. The officer said a Navy SEAL carried them out of the storm." Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with attention. "They did the hard part. They survived long enough to be found." Ranger stepped closer, sitting tall, eyes fixed on Emily with calm curiosity. Emily laughed softly and reached out before hesitating when she saw the service dog. "Do not pet Patch. He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's also the reason we're all standing here," Noah said. After the medical exams, Harold was deemed stable, but required medication and a few nights of monitoring. Emily hovered near, protective in a way that made Noah quietly relieved the couple wouldn't be alone anymore. The police soon arrived, a pair of uniformed officers who informed Emily and the Millers that Eldon Briggs, the predatory landlord, was being questioned. The The stolen package containing Harold's heart medication had been seized as evidence. For all his swagger, Eldon had apparently lost his nerve when sheriff deputies asked why 3 grown men needed to drive up a mountain during a storm looking for an elderly couple. "We'll make sure he doesn't bother you again," one officer said firmly. "People like him depend on silence." Well, silence just ran out. Ruth squeezed Noah's hand as he prepared to leave the hospital. "Thank you," she whispered. "You and Ranger, you were angels that night." Noah shook his head. "Just neighbors." But even Emily noticed his expression, the same guarded, almost wounded softness that came when someone tried to thank him for something he felt was simply his duty. Weeks passed. The snow atop the pines melted in slender streams, trickling down the mountainside like silver threads. Birds returned to the branches. The air held a faint scent of thawing earth. One bright morning, Sheriff Dalton drove up to Noah's cabin in a dusty SUV. Sheriff Marcus Dalton was a stout man in his early 60s, with a neatly trimmed white mustache, sharp blue eyes, and a voice that carried the authority of someone who had seen both good and evil in equal measure. He stepped out holding a folder thick with paperwork. "Noah," he said, "the town council voted unanimously. We want to designate this cabin as an official winter rescue base." Noah blinked. "Here?" Dalton gestured toward the valley below. "You already saved 3 hikers last year. Now the Millers. Word's getting around. People trust you." He lowered his voice. "And between us, knowing a SEAL and a trained war dog are up here makes the council sleep easier." Ranger barked once as if in agreement. Noah glanced toward the slope behind the cabin, where Ranger bounded through the melting snow, leaving deep paw prints. His father had once dreamed of turning this land into a sanctuary for lost travelers. Noah had never expected to fulfill that dream, but now, standing in the crisp sunlight, he felt something settle inside him, something right. "All right," Noah said. "I'll do it." A few days later, Harold and Ruth returned, escorted by Emily. Harold walked with careful steps, but color had returned to his cheeks. Ruth carried a small basket, inside which lay a hand-knitted scarf in soft gray and blue. "For Ranger," she said, smiling warmly. Ranger sat obediently as she wrapped the scarf around his thick neck. The dog huffed once in approval, earning laughter from everyone present. "We used to fear winter," Ruth told Noah, "but now, when I hear the snow falling, I think of that bark, the one that saved us." Noah looked out at the long mountain road, still shadowed in places where snow clung stubbornly. He felt Ranger lean against his leg, as if sensing his thoughts. There would always be storms, there would always be people in need, and there would always be men like Eldon Briggs, predators who believed the weak were theirs to torment. But as long as Noah and Ranger lived on this mountain, winter would never have the last word. Because for some people, the battlefield might be behind them, but the mission to protect the vulnerable never ended. And every bully, every cowardly threat, every Kekondo with cruel intent would learn that a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd were a silent storm waiting to rise. In the quiet after every storm, there is a moment when the world feels still again. Some call it luck, others call it mercy, but those who have walked through real darkness know the truth. Sometimes God sends help in the shape of ordinary people, and in the footsteps of a loyal dog long before we know we need it. Maybe that is the miracle hidden inside this winter night. That kindness can arrive without warning. That courage can rise from wounds we thought would never heal, and that no one, no matter how lost, has to face the cold alone. As you go back to your day, may this story remind you that grace is never far. It lives in the neighbors who stop to help, in the strangers who choose compassion, and in the quiet ways God watches over every step we take. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in everyday miracles. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel so these messages of hope can reach those who need them most. May God bless you and bless every soul who still believes that light can find its way through any storm.